This lesson is on working with purchase orders in the Uniform Accounting Network software. Please open your new client handbooks to page 39. Now, I know I'm skipping ahead. Our last lesson was in accounting maintenance and chapter 2, and we're going to chapter 3 now. I'm sort of skipping over the key software concepts. We're going to come back to that. But let's take a remember I said there are some sections, this is on page 36, I believe. Remember I said that there are some sections that are good for post-class reference material. So most of the material in this classroom you're going to want to discard and refer to the Accounting in General manual under the Need Help button as your day-to-day reference. But there are a few places where I think we summarize some concepts that are spread throughout that Accounting in General manual, and this is one of them. So these key software concepts, purchase orders, I believe it's about 3 or 4 pages, or 2 or 3 pages actually. That's a worthwhile thing to put a little post-it note or a page sticky in there, whatever you call them, and use that as after-class reference when you're first getting used to using the UEN software. But again, we're going to come back to that. We're going to just start with our exercises, our overview and exercises and purchase orders. This chapter is a bit misleading, and it seems like it's a pretty short chapter, only a couple exercises, but actually we're going to camp out here quite a bit. This will be a long lesson because we do hit a lot of areas. We hit the 4 different purchase order types, how to add vendors, which are required for some purchase order types, and we talk about some big software concepts throughout. So we're actually going to spend some time here, and actually I will divert a little. I won't follow the book exactly. But first of all, our overview. All right, well, I should say first of all the menu path: accounting, transactions, purchase orders. I flip to our software, which I have open. On our main menu, we go to accounting, maintenance. I can hear my voice going, feel my voice going already. I want to apologize in advance. I still got that cold, and so if I have to mute the mic for a moment, or I'll try my best to mute the mic before I start coughing and making a lot of noise here. If there's a pause in the audio, then you know why. So again, apologize in advance for that, and my cracking voice. All right, so we've got accounting, maintenance, and I'm sorry, we've been camping out. We've been in the maintenance section all class so far, and now we're starting the transaction area. So now we go to accounting, transactions, and here are all of our transaction buttons or menu items. It's in alphabetical order, so purchase orders is near the bottom. Click on purchase orders. That opens up the purchase orders area. A lot of things are similar here. A few new buttons that you haven't seen before. Well, we've got a lot of search options, and you want to, if a lot of this confuses you, you probably want to go back to your software and run that Welcome to UEN screencast, which shows you kind of a good overview of how the buttons and the forms function. But here we've got the usual Add button. This allows you to add anything new to your list in this area, make edits to anything in the list, delete items in the list, display items, and then post and print. Well, that's new to this chapter. And then, of course, the Close button, which allows you to close the area. All right. So, excuse me. So that's the purchase order area. We'll go back to our book now. Take a look at our overview. Well, I stole this from the overview in the Accounting in General manual, and this is like, I think they have about a 2 or 3 page overview of the different purchase order types. in that manual. So that's much better. I encourage you to read that. But here's the brief version to start off with. A purchase order is an official document detailing the authorization and commitment to commit goods or services. Oh, so let's stay right there for a second. This is an official document that you need detailing the authorization before you incur a purchase for purchasing goods and services. So it's a commitment that you made to purchase goods and services. Excuse me. Okay, so it's a commitment to purchase goods and services. Well, again, this is getting to accounting practices and procedures and principles that is beyond the scope of UAN. We enforce some of these accounting practices and procedures where, although you want to look to your Auditor State's website for all the documentation I mentioned at the beginning of class for details on which type, what this all means. When you make a commitment, what's required before you make a payment is basically what this is getting at. But this is one of those things that we do enforce in some ways within the software. And what this is saying is that before you make certain payments using certain appropriation codes, your budgetary codes for certain payments, you have to have this official document in place and recorded in UEN, this commitment and authorization, one of these four listed below. This is driven by your chart of accounts. So if we look back under our Need Help button to open up the Accounting in General manual and go to our appendices, oops, come on. We have a township. We'll look at the township. Under the chart of accounts, actually, remember the fund, appropriation program, and object codes. Well, those are your four components of your budgetary items for expenditures. And for the object code, in the object code section, appropriation object codes, it's got this column next to each object code in your appropriations. Direct charges, yes or no. And this is what the UAN software is driven by. What direct charge means is, if you have an account with this object code, it's going to look to the question, does this account accept direct charges? In other words, can I just make a payment without having a purchase order in place, purchase order or blanket certificate? If the answer is yes, like it is for all of these salary object codes, then that means you don't need to have a PO or a blanket certificate open. But as we scroll down here, we'll see, okay, employee fringe benefits, yeah, you can charge those directly. But we get to some other things, insurance benefits. We start seeing no all over the place, few yeses. But for the most part, as you go through your list, purchase services, no. Well, this would mean that in order to charge a budgetary item, an appropriation account code that has an object code of 300, purchase services, in a township, I would have to have a purchase order or blanket certificate with an unencumbered or an uncommitted amount balance available to make that payment. So that prior official document is required. So this is your guide for knowing which account codes require this or not. And like I said, the UAN software will enforce this rule anyways. So you might get a rude awakening occasionally when you try to make a payment and think it's a direct charge, and it's not. It's going to stop you in your tracks at some point when you're going through that payment process. So that's where that's your guideline, and that's what UAN is going to enforce. So back to our overview. So this is a commitment. We'll use the word encumbrance throughout, and that's what this is referring to. I mean, encumbrance can be other things when we talk about payroll. Certain things get encumbered, but a purchase order is definitely an encumbrance. You made a commitment for you may not have received the purchase goods, yet, or the services yet, but you've made a commitment to spend money on those particular types of services or goods, and maybe the services is done, but you haven't received the payment yet. You have to have this open before you can make that commitment, is the idea. All right, so we got 4 different types. Well, if we look in the software, we'll see when we go to add a new purchase order, and we speak of these generically as these are all purchase orders, although specifically there's 4 different types: a PO regular, then and now, a BC as in blanket certificate regular, and a BC super. And this is a very summarized, brief description of them. So I'll just read through this real quick. The PO regular, used to contract for specific goods or services from a particular vendor. Okay. I'll add another thing to that. Multiple appropriation account codes can be used in a PO regular. Don't have to be, but you can have multiple ones, and you must specify a vendor. And then we have PO then and now. That's identical to PO regular, except we'll get to in more detail later, but it's kind of like an admission that things were done incorrectly originally. You made a payment and made a commitment in a contract before the actual official document was in place. And so here, basically, you're showing that after the fact, you're showing that you're creating this purchase order so that you can make the payment when it comes due. The BC, everything else other than that aspect is identical. We'll talk about that a little bit later. BC regular, blanket certificate regular, used over an extended period of time to purchase a variety of goods or services of which the vendor, quantity, or price is indefinite or unknown. So a key distinction here is that the vendor might be unknown. Here you have to for these two, you have to specify a vendor. This one, and actually for BC Super, you do not. In fact, you might make several payments with maybe a BC regular that's got open for $10,000, and you might be made payments to different vendors for different amounts. It's when this goods and services are indefinite, unknown. All right, BC Super is very similar, but there's some fine distinctions that I'll refer you to some notes about that. BC Super is used over an extended period of time for specific, reoccurring, and reasonably predictable operating expenses such as gasoline, utilities, or consulting fees. With both of these two, you can only specify one appropriation account code in that for those on blanket certificates, compared to here we could have multiple account codes. There's other distinctions, but that's basically the basic overview. All right. Well, like I said, that's a brief overview. I encourage you to, since the software enforces this, maybe you were able to get away with this on your manual books, at least if I've talked to some folks who come to our live training classes and they said, oh, you know, we've been able to make payments without having a purchase order open. Well, for those account codes I mentioned and per the chart of accounts, you're not going to be able to do that. It's going to stop you from doing so. And a common question we get in the live classrooms or on the support line is, which type should I use for specific Nope, sorry about that, muting that. There's my cold again. But which type the question we get is which type should I use for specific things? And again, we're not here UAN going to offer an explanation for that. We'll refer you to some documents. There's actually quite a bit in the UN Accounting and General Manual itself. As mentioned here, our explanation is very brief in this book. But you can look at the frequently asked question menu in the purchase orders area, and I'd say especially these two things here are going to give you some good information. Especially the frequent under FAQs, it should answer these questions, or at least address them in part. Why would a PO be used instead of a BC? When is a PO then and now used? What is the difference between a BC regular and a BC super? A question. When is it better to use a BC super instead of a PO regular? And many more, as I said. So yeah, a question like that. The difference between a BC super a BC super versus a BC regular. Well, I've given you this is a brief explanation. This is going to give you a more thorough explanation and refer you to some other information in the Ohio Revised Code. And that's located right here. We've got, when you have the purchase orders area open, if you look under the frequently asked questions menu in the FAQ here, well, like I said, the best thing here is the FAQ under the FAQ. Kind of poetic there, huh? So, play within a play. FAQ, below the FAQ, click on that, and that opens you up to the purchase orders frequently asked questions, and as you can see, it's pretty thorough in addressing the questions I mentioned, plus a few more, about 2 or 3 pages there. You can also, we also mentioned that overview, like I said, is a bit more extensive than what we have. And lastly, the purchase order screencast tutorial, that'll show you a video. That's really more of a how-to video rather than a which one of these should I use type videos. But it'll show you specifically, give you good demonstrations of all 4 types of purchase orders, how to add, edit, and post. And we'll demonstrate that in a shorter version of that here as well. All right, so really that is your homework after this video. I would say don't move on to the payments section or the next section until you watch the screencast tutorial and you read over those 2 pages of frequently asked questions. I think that's worthwhile, at least in the overview. Not too much, shouldn't take you too much time. Okay, so I'm going to really combine, we've got exercise 1 and exercise 2. And I'm going to really change this a bit. I'll do a little bit of exercise 2, and then we'll complete exercise 1, and then we'll jump back to a few points in exercise 2. Exercise 2 is just a demonstration of the 4 different types. So we've got our 4 types of purchase orders. Got the PO regular, and like I said, there are different requirements here. So what you want to pay attention to now, right now, is the green in my screen. The green are the highlighted fields. Those, as always, indicate the required fields. So as we can see here, for a PO regular, the vendor must be specified. Before you can save this successfully, you must indicate what vendor you're paying. So maybe I'll just pick a vendor here. And then you also have the issue date and the certified date for this purchase order must be specified for a PO regular. The expiration date can be specified, but that's optional. So it's in white. We don't make it required. So I can make that today's date. Or as you see later, we can actually change it. We can forward date it or back date that date under certain circumstances. And here we've got sort of a status screen. These are read-only. We've got locations. You might have multiple addresses. Maybe Buckeye Electric has 2 different offices, so I could pick between the different offices. In this case, there's only one. And then you're assigned a number, which you'll see later, and then the total amount and the amount that you need to distribute, or the undistributed amount. Well, that's referring to this section here, detailed and distribution. But let's look at additional first, because this is common for all types. You've got some optional fields for maybe some special approval or terms of the agreement of your contract. You have one. You can type a purpose, which will show up on some different reports and put in a lot of space for information there. It'll also show up on the document itself. And then we've got the billing and the shipping address. Well, notice this is already filled in for us. Buckeye Township is our township. And the software will do that for you as well, but on the rare circumstances, if maybe you get billed at a different place than your actual township or your entity, you could change that. It's based on how you set up the different vendors, which I'll show you in a moment. Or maybe you get billed at township office, but then you want this shipped to a different location. You can change it here, but by default it's going to be your entity. So that is not, this screen doesn't show up automatically. You'd have to click this tab, additional. That's true for all the different types. But here we've got the detail and the distribution. Well, under detail, we've got, you can see the required fields, the quantity, description, unit price are all required. And then under distribution, the account code that you're going to distribute this amount to, and the amount for each account code that you're distributing it to. So for a purchase order regular, you could have multiple account codes. Now these are the data entry fields. This is very common throughout. If you remember the screencast, welcome to UN screencast, went over this, how these work. But I'm going to skip the non-required fields. You could fill in a requisition number. I'll just throw in a sample here. I'm going to pick some random numbers, so don't pay attention to that. I've got like quantity of 1, the description, we'll call it this just example for, let's say, electric. So it's the power company, and I'll just put in $100. Okay, now I did that kind of fast. Let me start over. Quantity 1, electric, and unit price and I'll make it $125. And I'm pressing the tab key, and that brings me over to the subtotal, $125. I can either click on Insert Row, or I can press the Enter key on my keyboard, and it'll pull it up to my grid. This doesn't actually save anything. It kind of makes it a little bit more official. Now you've selected this description. I could change these fields here. It says electric. Well, I could say maybe electric for January. And I'll change that, I'll leave that at $125. Or let's say it's $150. Typed it wrong. I can type over that. And then, so it's just a description that tells the computer how much money should be applied. Now notice this didn't quite update yet, but it will update in the status here. I click somewhere else, and then a data entry field updates to 150. Maybe I have a couple descriptions maybe I can say this is going to be for January and February's electric bill. Well, I can type in a quantity 1. I'll just say February, make it simple for right now. And that'll be another $150. Press the Enter key, and now I've got $300, and it's broken up with these two descriptions. So those descriptions will show up on my electric bill, or on my purchase order document. But what I want to do is distribute this to different account codes. So I'm not going to, now again, this is one of the, I'm not going to pick necessarily the right account codes. I'm just going to randomly pick a few account codes here. So notice what happened. Let's escape here. Get out of this. So I go down to distribute this $300 to different account codes. With the purchase order regular, I can select multiple account codes. I don't have to, but I have that option. So let's say I pick an account code here. And so notice when I highlight this field, go down here, data entry field, that little arrow pops up, and I can click on it, and it'll open up this list of all of my account codes that are active in the UAN system. Now yours will probably be a much longer list of account codes. And here, and it shows me the unencumbered balance at this time, estimated unencumbered balance. So I'm going to pick an account code. So let's see, I'll say operating supplies. Again, probably doesn't make sense, but I'm just picking that randomly. Notice I can't change this field because this is driven by my chart of accounts. I just pick the account code, that's the description. It's the Uniform Accounting Network, remember. So let's say I want to charge $150 or maybe $100 to this account code. Click on the arrow, insert row arrow, and it pulls it up to that field. And then I select, and then I want to distribute the rest of it to another account code. So I'll randomly pick another one here. And in the general fund, a little different one, same description. And that fills in the remaining undistributed balance. Well, let's say that's it. That's my last one. I want to distribute it there. So press the Enter key, and it pulls it up to my list. So now I've got my accounts fully distributed. I've got all my required fields filled out. I could save this purchase order regular. Excuse me. Well, let's say I look at this and I say, well, I don't want to distribute this between $100 and $120. I mean, $100 here and $200 here. Actually, you could have maybe 5 or 10 account codes listed here, and you want to distribute this amount among all those account codes equally. Well, that's what this checkbox is about, distribute it equally. So notice how this amount changes when I click on it. It'll distribute it equally among the 2 account codes, which just comes up to $150 each. Also, we've got a nice little feature here for all of the types. It says remember dates until form closes. If I don't fill in that checkbox, these dates are going to clear out when I go to do my next purchase order. In other words, I'll have to pick the dates again. But if maybe I'm entering multiple regular purchase orders in at the same time, maybe 3 or 4 at the same time, and they're all going to be the same issue and certified date, or even expiration date if I have one. If I click on this checkbox, it'll retain those dates. It saves me a little bit of time there. So I'm going to click on the Save button, and you can see now that that PO is added to my list. It's assigned a batch number, a temporary number. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And now I can start adding another purchase order regular. And my dates were retained. Okay, but I'm not going to add any more PO regulars, so I'm going to close this form. All right, now you can't just switch between types when you have the form open. You have to go to use the Add button. I'm going to skip to the PO then and, or I'm going to go to the PO then and now, click on that, and I'll just show you the distinctions. I'm not going to add one of these. This is identical. All the fields are identical to the PO regular with the exception of this. You now have a then date. So you could say, well, today's calendar date is actually September 1st. That's when I'm recording this. But let's say someone in my township made a payment for something that was not authorized. The document was not in place ahead of time for the particular account code that will need to be charged. If that's the case, well, that wasn't done correctly. The payment should have been, a document should have been in place, a purchase order or blank certificate to have that account code. But if that happens, then you should record it as a then and now purchase order. And so we'll say today's date, PO's today's date, certified today. But then if that happened last week, maybe on Monday, August, then you'd put in the then date. And so this would stand out to your auditors, and they'd want to see this, that, okay, and this basically says, well, the money, the appropriations, the budget was really there, and at this time on September 1st, it is, we do have an unencumbered balance or an amount available to be spent in that appropriation code or codes, but it just wasn't issued and certified before the payment was actually made, or maybe that the obligation was incurred and service was rendered, maybe payment wasn't made. Then you're basically just submitting that and showing that this is when it, and that way you can indicate the date that it actually was incurred, but now we're just getting to produce that document. So that's important that you do it that way. And I'll just caution that your auditors do not like to see a lot of these then and now purchase orders. If you follow the Charter of Accounts, for those account codes, you require a document in place before you enter a commitment or make a payment on those account codes. You should have the PO or the blanket certificate in place beforehand, and they really don't like to see these, many of these going on. All right, so I'm going to click on close because I'm not going to save the changes. So if I want to save this one thing, I get a lot of error messages. When I say yes, I'll show you. I'm going to try to save this. Well, it's not going to let me save it because I'm missing all of these required fields. So we can look at these little dots and it says this field is required. If I hover my mouse over it, so I'm going to close it, and this time I'm going to say no, I don't want to save that. And now we're looking at a BC regular. Well, something should stand out on this screen. For a BC regular, the vendor is not required. Remember, we said you can specify a vendor, but you're not required to do so. So delete that. But however, you are required to specify an expiration date. And again, you can kind of look at the frequently asked questions on that and look at your Ohio Supplemental and so forth to find out if you have any questions about the expiration date. But you must specify one on a blanket certificate, regular or super. And nothing else appears to be different on the screen, but if I'll go ahead and specify, go ahead and fill in the fields here real quickly. Notice the description is also not required. So I'm not going to put one in. I'll just put in $10 here, and I'm going to pick a random account code again, and $10. Notice what happens if I try to do this, though. Make that, do it this way, $5, change that to 5. Oops. So now it appears like it'll save this, but notice what happens. I get an error message. It says only one appropriation account may be charged on a BC. So again, the software enforces that rule. So I can close that, just distribute it to one, and save it, and move on to my next blanket certificate. I didn't click on the Remember Dates checkbox, so notice how it cleared out my dates. All right, and then lastly is the BC Super. Again, this is very similar to BC Regular as far as how the form looks. I'm going to select my dates. The expiration date is required to fill in. And we put in another example here. Again, I can only specify one account code for a BC Super. One distinction between that is that with the BC Super, for instance, I could open up an account, another blanket certificate Super, if it's for the right purposes and everything, using the same account code. For BC Regular, you can't have two BC Regulars open with the exact same account code. You could have one open, then close it, and then open up another BC Regular with that account code, but you can't have them both open at the same time. And that's one of those other fine distinctions between a BC Regular and Super. Super will allow that. But I'm not going to save that one. I'll just say no. Well, actually, why not? I'll save it. All right, so now we've got these three in place. All right, I'm going to get back, and as you can see, it says multiple account codes for this one, and here, this is just kind of like a preview screen. Kind of shows you what you have in batch, which we'll get to. All right, so let's jump back to the exercise number 1. I'm going to add a PO regular for the garden store. Remember our Buckeye Township story. We're going to get a donation, and we're going to for the grave of Woody Hayes, beautification of the grave. And so one of the things we're going to do, if you look on page 40, is we're going to purchase a Buckeye tree for the garden store. So if I add a purchase order regular, I've got my dates. I'll go ahead and select the dates, or today's date for the date issued and certified. I'll put in the quantity, which is the quantity of 1. Oops. I press the Enter key, which is not real good in this screen. I press the Tab key, and that brings me to the description, which is required for PO regular, and that's for the Buckeye. I'll just say Buckeye. And then the price is $100. Press the Enter key now, and it pulls that up to the detail. Then I select my account code. A nice trick about this, and this works for all of these types of screens, is notice you could have a huge list of account codes. When you in your entity, notice that instead of scrolling down this way, I can press number 4, and it narrows down my list. So maybe 495. These funds, 4951, 4952, or I type in 52, and it narrows it down just to that fund. I could type it all the way in, or since it's short, I'll just pick the account code I need, which is 320. And then, so it's $100, that's what I want, so I'll pull that into my distribution list. And now we've got everything we need except the vendor. If I try to save this, I get an error message. This is a required field. All right, so my vendor is the garden store. If I look at my vendor list, it's not there. So if you don't have the vendor that you need set up, then you're going to have to go to a different area of the software to set up that vendor. You can't type in, I'm trying to type, I can't type in garden store. Won't work. So it's a select list. So a nice thing about this is, notice this is a whole separate window. I don't have to, well, maybe I had 10 account codes here. I don't have to close this and redo that work again. I can minimize it. I use the Windows little minimize button here and minimize it. It's still on my computer. If I look down here, you can see Add Purchase Order. Click on that, it minimizes and brings it back up. Just clicking. And here I've got Uniform Accounting Network. Well, that's my main menu here. What I need to do, if we go back to page 40, is I need to add a vendor. And we'll show you the ins and outs of getting to the vendor. It's actually located under General Maintenance. But you have a shortcut under your purchase orders related screens. It's called Vendors Payees. If I click on that, that area opens. It shows me all of my current payees, vendors and payees. To add a new one, I click on the Add button. It opens up the Add Vendor Payee form, and I only have two required fields, the name of the vendor and where it's going to be available. Well, let's first type in the name. The name is the Garden Store. So, Garden Store. And then there's this Available In area. Well, what's that talking about? What that means is that when you check these boxes, this vendor will be available in these particular areas. So I know that, and I have to pick at least one of these. So I know that I want this to be available in the accounting purchase orders, and I also want to make a payment to them, so I want it to be in the payment screen, in the drop-down menus of these areas. So that's, oops, so I'll go back to Vendor Payee. So I would want to fill in that checkbox. Now I could fill in all the checkboxes, but not all of them. I don't expect to receive any revenue from the Garden Store. They're not going to send me a check. I'm sending them a check. So I wouldn't select accounting receipts. I'm probably not going to have this bill sent to the Garden Store as a vendor. I mean, they're the ones that I'm paying, so they're not. I don't want the bill sent to them, right? That doesn't make sense. But that's what this bill 2 is about. If I go back to, if this were like, well, that's what that's referring to. If I want this vendor, which could be something else, in my Bill 2 Ship 2 section of purchase orders, then it'll show up there. Like here, I've got a few other ones. But payroll withholdings is just when we, later on in the upcoming years, when we add the payroll system, that's kind of looking ahead. And then inventory refers to the optional inventory program. So we're going to leave those clear and just select the accounting, purchases, and payments. Well, so here you can fill out description, terms. This is all optional information for your records. You can have this as active or activate or deactivate this. So maybe in years to come, you find that you're never going to make another payment to the Garden Store. You can make it an inactive vendor, and it won't show up on your list of active vendors. But, of course, we want this active at this time. Another section here is the 1099 information. Well, this tells the software that come once a year when you produce 1099s for vendors that are required by law for you to send a 1099 form, this UN software allows you to do that. Now, it doesn't print the actual form. It prints the data. You have to get the forms and put them in your printer. But UN will do that if you have this checkbox filled in. When you and you need to have it filled in before you make the payments, so it can keep track of that those payments. And if that vendor is required, then it'll produce it. That's what's telling the software that this vendor should have a 1099 sent to them. Now, if you do fill in that checkbox, these aren't in green here, in the background, but you are required to fill in one of these two, either the vendor's Social Security number or the vendor's tax ID number. So I would say one suggestion, that has been mentioned to me by some fiscal officers, is that if you're unsure, when in doubt, fill in the checkbox, and that way, if you end up printing a 1099, it's not really required. Well, the worst thing that's happened is you wasted a form. But if you don't fill it in, and it is required, then you may end up not sending a 1099 to a vendor that should have one sent to it. So I think I'll go back on my one thing. I don't think you actually have to have it. You can come back here and change this at any time. So you can, if you realize later, you can't come back and change this to 1099 or not. All right, the last section is locations. Well, again, that's not required, but it's relevant to what we'll see in the purchases and payments later. This is the address that of the vendor, and this could print on the purchase order form, also on your payments when you make the payment. And if you want to add an address, notice what happens. Click on the Add button. The vendor payee must be saved before adding locations. Well, why is that? And do you want to save this? Well, it'll save it. Let us save it as long as we've got the required fields filled out, these two. And the reason it wants to save it now is because logically in the program, it doesn't want you to, it's basically saying, you're saying, well, I want to save an address for vendor, but I haven't actually saved the vendor yet in the system. So it's going to force you to save that vendor first and then add an address to it. So that's the idea. So I'll click OK, and I forgot I don't really need a 1099 for this vendor. So I'll try that again. That was the required fields. Notice you must have one or the other when that's checked. So uncheck that, click Add. Do I want to save it now? OK. And now it is saved. If you look on the background, you can see the garden store is now one of our vendors. And I can add a location. Well, we're real creative here at UEN. We're going to call this store. That's the only required field for location. Of course, it may make sense to put in the address and contact information, but we'll just save this. And then I could add other locations. I mean, maybe this vendor has a store location, an office location, a warehouse, or multiple stores. And notice that related to this area, I could deactivate those locations. If there's never been any activity associated with the vacation, I could delete it, etc. So you could have as many, really, I don't know what the limit is, but it's pretty high, locations as you want, and you can make them active or deactive depending on whether they're still relevant for your vendor. So I'll just leave it at the store location, and I'll save this vendor. And I can move on to another vendor if I want to, but I'll close the form. And I'll close my vendor payees area. And now, well, what about that purchase order to the blanket, to the garden store? Well, if I still have it open, I look at the bottom of the screen, and look at there. It says that was a problem. We didn't have the vendor specified. Well, now if I go and click the drop-down menu, there it is, the garden store. So that's kind of nice. Adds it automatically. Didn't have to change anything here. I mean, didn't have to close this and start over. Just add the vendor. There it is. Also, another neat trick, if I type in G, it narrows it down to everything that starts with a G. It just goes by, I type in B, then get all the B's, etc. So save you a little time there. Click on Garden Store, and now it'll let me save this purchase order. Gives me a little confirmation at the bottom, and then I'll close the form. All right, so we've got our purchase order saved. This brings us back to our key concepts chapter, which I'm not going to go over that in everything, but I'm going to touch on some of it. Back to page 36 through 38. Well, there's a note about overspending on purchase orders. By law, currently you're allowed to overspend a purchase order regular by 5% of the original balance. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to payments. I'll leave it at that for right now. Save to batch. Excuse me. Well, I'll just jump back to page 36. Oops, maybe it doesn't correspond exactly on here. Save to batch. Well, that's more of a programming term, but it's very relevant. This relates to the save button that appear when you're in the add or the edit form. So I've just been clicking save a number of times. You'll see this under all your transactions, the save button under purchase orders, payments, and receipts, and maybe a few others. Whenever you see that save button, in this case, it's referring to saving to batch. So purchase orders, payments, and receipts can save to batch. And the purchase order is a little bit different than the cash transactions. It's not a cash transaction. It's really more of a budgetary action, isn't it, or an authorization. And here's the definition. In UEN, a PRBC in batch is one or more purchase order transactions that have been saved in the software database but have not posted as an encumbrance, remember commitment, on appropriations and is not yet part of the entity's permanent record. So two things. When it's in batch, it hasn't become part of your permanent records, it hasn't encumbered your, and it has not encumbered or obligated your appropriation budget amounts for those codes that are specified in it. So if we look back at our examples, these are all temporary. This is they're all in batch. They have a temporary number assigned to them. And at this point, they won't show up on my reports. Now, there's a few reports you can select an option to show your batch. You can filter by batch items, but they're only available on those reports, and they haven't become part of your permanent records. It's all temporary. If we look at one of our key reports is under purchase orders, so reports and statements, purchase order reports. Let's see, PO detail has this. If you look we look under the filters, we have a filter that shows just the open purchase orders. We can also look at the purchase orders that are in batch. So we could actually print a report, even though this is temporary, we can print a report that shows, you know, the effect this would have if it would actually became permanent. All right, so back to the purchase orders. So these are in batch. They haven't encumbered money, and so that means also for the garden store, I'm not going to be able to make a payment at this point in time. If I go to my accounting transactions payments and try to make a payment to the garden store using this account code, it's not going to let me do it because I have not posted this to batch. I've not posted this, and we'll talk about what posting is, but it hasn't become part of my permanent records. Well, that can be a good thing. I can enter all of these in and say, well, maybe I want to make some changes here, like with this Buckeye Electric Power. Here I can still make edits to this before it becomes part of the permanent record. Once it's permanent, all I can do is close it or maybe lower the amount, but I can't make any edits to it. So here I can still edit it, make an edit. Maybe I can change the vendor. I can change anything in here. Notice maybe I don't need this. This should just really be for January. So I just click the X, delete that row, gets rid of that. I can delete this row, or delete this, or change the account code. In this case, I'll just get rid of both of those. And then I can save it again. Well, this also touches on, all right, well, let me leave it at that. So these are in batch. Also, maybe I just want to get rid of the thing altogether. I want to start over, or maybe I find out we really don't need those supplies. It's false call. We're not going to enter in that. Don't need to make a purchase order for that. I can delete it this time. So I just select the account or the item and then delete. And I'm not sure why it's saying delete two selected items. Look into that. Okay. All right. That is something probably interesting message I'll look into, but it did allow me to delete it. So I'll mention that to programmers. That might be because of the test data I'm using, or maybe because I've been fooling around with this a lot. But it worked. Did delete that. And now let's go back to our book. So that's batch, and you can read about the rest of the batch description. Then we've got posting purchase orders. Well, what happens when you post the purchase order? Well, again, we're talking about this post print button. Well, when you post a purchase order, the appropriations and the purchase order are encumbered on the calendar date that the purchase order is posted. Not the issue date. Remember, we specified issue date, but the actual calendar date that the post print button is clicked. And so these dates could be different. However, they will appear on your ledger reports based on the issue date. So whatever date you have in the issue date, it's going to appear on some of your reports, like ledger reports, as they'll already appear regardless of your calendar date. All right, so basically when you post it, it encumbers the appropriation account in that the amount you specified or accounts, and it basically hits your reports, shows up on your reports. All right, reports are updated, as I mentioned. And then so 3 things happens. It encumbers on the amount, your reports are updated, and the purchase order or blanket official document prints to the printer. Okay, and you can read over the rest of the notes there. Here we have some notes on the calendar date. You'll see on some reports that you'll have a transaction date and a post date or an issue date for purchase orders. Well, the transaction date will always correspond to your actual calendar date that you clicked this post print button, regardless of this issue date. So maybe you date this in advance, or maybe you backdate it, which is discussed in the key concepts. Regardless of the date here, so here it shows the issue date. Before, I could change this one maybe to forward dating it. Regardless of the date here, when you click post print, it's going to encumber that money on the calendar date, your real date. And it's going to show that on some reports we have a transaction date listed, and it'll show it as the transaction date. So if I look at one of our key reports, the PO status, if I look at this, so one I already have in there, we've got an issue date and a transaction date, and they can be different. That one's a very weird example, but all right, so you can read over the rest of that. You can backdate purchase orders, but really this should be done on very rare occasions. One of those occasions should be, for some of those of you who are listening to this, when you're converting. You're going to have to, if you're converting in June 2011, or now it's September, and you're going to have to, you're doing the detailed type of conversion, then you're going to have to backdate all of your purchase orders. Well, that's an exception. 99.99% of the time, you should never backdate a purchase order. If you have to backdate, as it says in this bullet point, then you should really record it as a purchase order then and now. And again, nothing's going to escape your auditors. There's a report that shows all of your backdating of any type. So you really should just, most of the time, if you're going to backdate, it should be a PO then and now. But I'll let you read over that description. Then we've got forward dating. Well, you can, or post dating, same idea, might be referred to as that. You can forward date purchase orders up to 30 days in advance. I can't see why you would want to do that 30 days in advance, but it'll allow you to do so. And again, it's going to encumber that amount as soon as you click on the post print button. All right, so even though it's forward dated maybe a couple days in advance, yeah, it'll print as the post or issue date maybe a couple days in advance. If we look at this one, where it's got an issue date of the 3rd, and we're only on the 1st, it'll print on that document as the 3rd, but in the system it's going to encumber this amount right away. All right, so I think that hits all of our concepts. I already mentioned the remember dates until the form closes. And so these were really part of our exercises. Now notice the batch number. If I selected all of these in the header checkbox and posted them, It would post them in this batch order, most likely. But actually wouldn't correspond to my numbers here, because this goes from 7, 8, and then 10, because I deleted one. So a key point is, sometimes just by the way you do things, your batch numbers will match your actual purchase order numbers, but not necessarily. In this case, it wouldn't. So don't count on this number being the same as what prints on the purchase order blank certificate document. But you can post them all together, or you could post one at a time. I'm actually going to delete the ones that I used in my sample, and just keep the one that we had in our exercise. Everything's the same there, except it should be today's date. We'll save that, close it. So now this is what I really want to do. When I go to post and print, it asks me if I really want to do that. Say OK. And then it'll bring up this print utility, printing one PO regular. If you had a BC here, it would bring up another print utility saying print one BC regular. So it's utility is driven by the type. Notice you can, if you need a copy of this document, you can print 2 or 3 or as many copies as you need. And then you click the print button to send it to your printer. Did all the items print successfully? Yes or no? Well, let's notice that these already posted. We've got a message here that says posted one item. So it already encumbered the appropriation budget amount of that $100. It did encumber that. And it's just a matter of whether your printer jammed. Maybe you didn't have paper in there. Maybe you had a print jam. So maybe you just need to put paper in there. Well, if that's the case, then you would select no. If you select yes, it's just going to leave you on the screen. If you select no, it opens up the purchase order utility screen. Well, that's for another session, but I'll show you one thing in here. There's that garden store. It posted to cash, and I can reprint it here. So if I need another copy, I can reprint it if my printer jammed. So that's what that does when you select no. Okay, so that's all I have for purchase orders for now. We'll touch on it a little bit more later when we get to payments. Oh, I take that back. Sorry, one more thing, reports. One of our key reports is the appropriation status. And I wish I'd shown you before one. I forgot about that. But if we look at the appropriation status, as of, remember you have to pick, and then here you have to pick up as of date, it's as of today. I'm just going to print that for that account code I used, the 4952-320, this property services, and display that. And here we can see what that looks like. Well, we still don't have a cash balance in that fund, but we do have a budgetary amount for that account code, and it's under our final appropriation for the year for that account code is $300. Our current reserve for encumbrance, that's the amount we've obligated or committed. Well, we have a purchase order open for $100 to the garden store. So if I did it before the appropriation status, it would show 0 here, and it would have shown $300 unencumbered. But now that I have that purchase order open and I posted it to cash, now that I have that open, now the reserve for encumbrance is $100, and I've got for this account code an unencumbered balance or uncommitted balance of $200. So your encumbrance comes, this reserve for encumbrance comes from your purchase. One of the things is if you open a purchase order, it's going to encumber that amount. So when we get to utilities, I'll expand on this a little bit. Maybe I'll close a purchase order and I'll show you how that might become unencumbered. But yeah, rather than backtracking, I don't want to do that. Just to describe, if we had printed this while it was in batch, which was what I meant to do, what you would have seen would be $300 here, 0 here, and $300 here. Because while it's in batch, it hasn't encumbered anything. Once you post it, it gets encumbered. And so this is a great report for that. Another really good report, you might want to write this down, I don't think it's in your book, is related to this purchase orders and appropriations, is this Appropriation Open Purchase Order Register. And that shows you your POs by account code. I won't go there, but it's an excellent report to look at on this subject. Okay, so our next section is on cash transactions, starting with payments, I believe. No, starting with receipts.